Ready. Play.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever time it is in the world, wherever you are tuning in from. In fact, we were just talking about the times, trying to tune into the Australian Open and the challenges that are posed. Amy was saying that it was a pretty early start for you. You're on the East Coast, right, Amy?
Yes, very close to New York City.
Okay. So, yeah, a little challenging, but some very early starts. Was it worth it this morning getting up super early to watch the Djokovic-Alcaraz match, in your opinion?
Oh, 100%. Some of those epic points. There was one point in particular, I think it was 30 shots late in the match. That alone, if I had to wake up in the middle of the night and watch one point, it would have been worth it.
Seemed to me, though, that most of those points, particularly in the first three sets, it was the lofted arm of Djokovic at the end of it, which I know we've seen it for many years. We're going to come to a semi-final prospect as well against Zverev very, very soon. And I remember an epic rally those two had in New York that I think was almost 60 shots. But we've often been used to it. However, it should be the younger guy who should be winning those rallies, right?
Actually, that particular 30-shot rally, I think Alcaraz did win.
Okay.
One of my favorite data points in all of tennis is that the person who wins the most of the long rallies in the match is slightly less apt to win the match.
Okay.
That's how little those things matter. And
Uh-huh.
the players know this, and they will say, okay, that was an epic battle. It was a great point. It's only 1 point in isolation. It really doesn't mean much to the outcome of this match.
Well, the outcome of that match, of course, was a Djokovic win in 4 sets. Did that surprise you, the outcome, the result, the manner of it?
Well, in my pre-tournament preview, I picked Djokovic over Alcaraz in this
Okay.
quarterfinal match in 5. So
Okay.
I missed it by a set. And if
Yeah.
Alcaraz could have pulled some things together there in that final set, I might have
Would
hit
you have
it
been
spot on.
confident for Novak going into a potential fifth, though, bearing in mind what we'd seen?
I'm never confident. I mean, this is like an epic rivalry between these two that is so interesting because of the difference in age. But surface is another factor. I mean, this is the one Carlos doesn't have yet, and
Hmm.
this is Novak's best Grand Slam. So there's all these factors that compete against each other. And of course, the respect that the two players have for each other makes this just such an enticing battle.
Yes, indeed. I'm not ashamed to say I had this match happening, but I did have Alcaraz emerging the winner. In fact, even a day or so ago, I made repeated the same mistake, you could argue. But that is tennis. It's the unpredictability that keeps us going, and Djokovic keeps defying the odds, Amy.
Absolutely. I mean, he comes out and Alcaraz pulls him wide on a forehand and he does something, tweaks his groin or something like
Hmm.
that, has to take a medical timeout. And Carlos closes the set after that, the first set, and you think to yourself, and I have a lot of people tweeting at me, Father Time is undefeated, age is always a factor. And tell that to Mahac and Lehechka, who just lost to this 37-year-old. Yes, it's a factor. It's a factor, but it's only one of many factors, including surface, including experience, including things like forehand to forehand rallies or backhand to backhand rallies, use of the drop shot, anticipation skills. It's just one of many factors. Now, I will say that your pick was not outrageous because of the time on court. Novak had 11 hours on court coming into
Hmm.
this match, where Alcaraz had under 8, I believe.
That's right. I remember seeing that stat pop up. It was about 11-8, as you said, and the 3 hour differential between them. And I saw that stat pop up, I think, around the beginning of the second set. But in the end, it didn't matter. I wonder if it had have gone 5, if we might have seen a swing big enough in momentum to Carlos. But that's ifs, buts, and maybes. Djokovic won in 4 sets, and now, of course, we'll be playing Alexander Zverev. Zverev, of course, came through a 4 set match with Tommy Paul. Bit of a bizarre one, this one, in that I think Tommy Paul was arguably the better player for 3 of the 4 sets. There were set points in the first two for Tommy. I think he was serving for at least one of those sets as well. And he just couldn't win those super important big points. And then he kind of carried a hangover into both of the two tiebreakers. He won just 1 point out of 14. I jokingly said at the time that basically I could have played those two tiebreakers and I might have won more than one. I think I wouldn't have done, Amy, if we're all honest with each other. But 1 point from 15 points, as it turned out, because he loses those 14-1 is not going to help. And I think it was just such a mental challenge going into those two tie breaks that he carried that on. But anyway, Zverev emerges, 4-set win. He's in another Grand Slam semi-final. What have you made either of that match, Amy? But I know it happened in the middle of the night for you. Or
I
even
caught
just,
up.
Okay, good.
I sort of fast forwarded and looked at some highlights, and I've seen Tommy play most of his matches this tournament.
Okay.
This also I picked to be the quarterfinal, and I did pick Zverev to come through only because Tommy had a 5-setter in his first round match and was coming off a tournament immediately preceding. He chose to play the week before, but not come to Australia earlier. It's a calculation, and he had an injury. So it was, even though his last couple of matches he was really starting to play into form, I thought that it might catch up to him. And because of surface and conditions, one of the best servers in the game right now is Zverev, particularly on his first serve percentages. And that was just going to be too much, I think. Serve is an area where Tommy he's good, but he's not elite. So this surface in these conditions were always going to be a challenge for him to come through.
Yeah, there's so many narratives going on in tennis. It's sometimes difficult to keep up, and changes and things evolving in terms of players' game. Something that's not talked about often enough, perhaps, is Zverev's second serve, which used to be a huge thing. He would either go big on it and double fault. He would go so tame, and you'd be looking at it. And I remember the 4th round match, I think it was, with Shapovalov in Australia 3 years ago, pretty much. That's almost a line in the sand. Okay, we had the injury for Zverev that happened a few months later, but I think he had a pretty good, spell up until that French Open semi-final, which was on a knife edge when he incurs that ankle injury. Then he comes back and it takes him a while. But in that sort of 18 months, and I did hear him say this at a press conference, I think in Hamburg last year, that was something that he really has. First of all, as you say, getting those, if you've got a bigger service he has and you're getting 80% plus of those in on a regular basis in terms of these matches, you're going to do pretty well. I saw Carlos, by the way, was down to 33% second service points won. And I know I'm jumping around a bit between the first and the second serve a bit here, but I know the stats probably as well as I do, that's a huge area of Alexander's game that he's really progressed in.
Absolutely. I mean, if you play the game and you get injured, it is one of the most frustrating things, and you're going to be out for months and months. But Alexander really took it as an opportunity to say, okay, what can I do? What can I work on? And probably had some time to think about what kinds of serve he wants to hit there. He's a tall player. Different strategies for different players. Do you want to hit kick? Do you want to do what is becoming more in vogue, which is sort of a hybrid between first and second there, slider out wide on the deuce? So he really retooled that aspect and mentally shored himself up. And that isn't even something we talk about anymore with him, his second serve.
No.
So good point there.
Yeah, indeed. I've got the head-to-head there on the screen, 8-4 in the favor of Djokovic and Zverev. Before I even look at the matches that they had, I do remember at least one Grand Slam semi-final in New York in 2021 when Djokovic was walking that tightrope of trying to get the calendar slam and ultimately emerging in 5 sets that night before losing to Medvedev in the final. That was an epic match. We talked about epic rallies as well in the match with Alcaraz today. That included a rally of, I think it was pushing 60 shots, very deep in the match. These rallies often do tend to occur, by the way. The longer the match goes on, the longer the rallies are. But anyway, let's have a quick look at some of these encounters they've had in the past. They've not played each other in 18 months. which is kind of interesting in that both of them,
Mhm.
both very much at the top of the game, and that was in Cincinnati. In fact, that's the only time they've played each other since 2021, and they've only played each other twice since that US Open semi-final. What any of these matches from yesteryear that you remember sticking out in your mind?
I like that US Open one,
Yeah.
because they were both hard court on, surfaces that are not, Australian Open used to be super fast. It's slowed down a bit, and of course, US Open is really slowed down. So that's a really similar, more apples to, green apples to red apples, not apples to apples. But, yeah, I mean, I don't think you're gonna have as many long rallies in this just because of the nature of how Zverev plays. He'll have a lot of free points on serve, and, he'll be going up against one of the best returners in the history of the sport. So, I think I rarely say this, but I think mental for Zverev is gonna have a lot to do with it because we know he doesn't have a slam yet.
Mm-hmm.
This is a big hurdle to cross.
Yeah.
Djokovic is the GOAT, and he also happens to own the head-to-head pretty squarely here.
Mm-hmm.
So, mentally, can he keep his wits about him? Will be and let's say he drops the first set, or let's say he drops the second set. Will he be able to collect himself and get past some of these mental demons?
I think this match, for some of those reasons, is so difficult to call. Now, I've made predictions throughout this tournament and across many years in tennis now, and probably got many of them wrong, including, of course, today's with Alcaraz. But I did have my reasoning, and I felt not confident, but I thought the odds were slightly in favour of Alcaraz. For whatever reason, that ended up not being the case. With this one, so I had an Alcaraz Zverev semi-final in my bracket at the beginning of the tournament, and I had Zverev winning that particular encounter, repeating the feat he did last year. But now it's against Djokovic. Of course, that makes it a little bit. I've got to recalibrate, if you like, and rethink this through. And I just can't decide. And you know what? Anything from all the sort of variables, a tight. I can't see an absolute beatdown for either player, but a tight 3-set win for either, or 4 or 5 sets could well go that way. I see pros and cons. I think Zverev is, over the last 12 months, it's been the best 12-month block in terms of his abilities and where he's at. Making Grand Slam finals. There's obviously some pain there. 2-1 up against Alcaraz in the French Open. 2-love up over Medvedev in the semis a year ago. So there's plenty. That's just recent scar tissue. Never mind if you go back further. So there are some question marks that I think shouldn't affect Novak too much. I think that he'll be okay on that front. But then physically, I do think if it goes 4 or 5, you would think that you would go towards the younger player. And I wonder how that would have panned out today had that gone 5. But looking at their paths as well, there's lots of reason for optimism for Djokovic in that he seems to be getting better and better and better. The first 2 rounds were anything but convincing over Basavaredi and Jaime Faria. But then those 2 wins over the Czech players, that really, for me, with Djokovic, that put me in a bit of a position to get with that match with Alcaraz that started to make me rethink. I didn't go as far as change my mind, but it did make me think, this is going to be a lot closer than I thought. So when it comes to the semi-final, as you can tell, I'm stuck. But I'm gonna go with the younger guy. I'm gonna go with Zverev. I'm gonna go with him in 4 sets, but possibly only just because I'm being stubborn, Amy, which is obviously not clever when you're making predictions. But I did predict Zverev to make the final at the beginning of the tournament. I'm going to stick with that, I think.
Yeah, it's tough when you get things right. Like I had picked Djokovic and I had picked Zverev. So now I have this matchup and I picked Zverev at
Okay.
pre-tournament. But then you have to digest and synthesize what you've seen over the course of the
Yep.
tournament. And then people ask you, do you stick with it? I am going to stick with it. It's hard to do. It's really hard to pick against the GOAT. And it, of course, would not surprise me. But for Zverev, I like that this is a semifinal and not a final. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. And I just, I like the way he's serving. I like the fact I like his improved forehand. Um,
Yeah.
I like the fact that he has less time on court, and Novak is a little dinged up. So, that I'm gonna stick with my original pick, and I have Sinner on the other side going to the final.
Yes, I do as well. I think most people have Sinner progressing as well.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on all things tennis.